Like a draft tweet.
You're trying that one?
Draft tweet, I think, because that speaks to people. We have a Twitter politics, a Twitter president. People get that, I think.
There you go. Yeah, that tweet is stuck in the draft folder.
In the draft folder. Thank you, Chuck Todd. We begin tonight with live pictures of Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi right now. She is heading into her 8th hour on the House floor. She's spotlighting, she says, the fight for dreamers as Congress debates funding and immigration. You may know the old saying, you can't drink all day if you don't start in the morning. Well, Congressman Pelosi started in the morning, first thing, 10:04 a.m., and we can report this is now, what you're looking at on your screen, the longest speech in the history of the United States House of Representatives. Pelosi's push for Democrats to be bolder is coming at the same time that the Senate is brokering a compromise deal with Republicans, and Democrats are celebrating a win last night in a Trump district in Missouri. Meanwhile, the president focusing on his unusual order for a military parade. Tonight, we will question a Trump surrogate about that particular idea. Also, important new warnings from Trump's top diplomat, Russia meddling in the midterms right now. That news comes as Democrats name a new leader of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. His lawyer joins me tonight for an exclusive. So, as you can see, I think we have a lot going on, including following Pelosi's ongoing address. But we begin with this escalating standoff between Bob Mueller and Donald Trump. Will Trump testify like Bill Clinton ultimately did? Will he take a subpoena fight to the Supreme Court, as Nixon did? Or is there a third way, an alternative route? There's news on that front tonight on a middle ground where Trump could lawfully stonewall Mueller without risking a constitutional crisis. Now, if you love Trump, you might not like this legal idea. And if you loathe Trump, you might not like this idea either. That's why I called it a middle ground. It comes, of all places, from a former judge, a former prosecutor, a former attorney general. It comes from Eric Holder, who's making waves tonight by offering this alternative road for Donald Trump to sit down with Mueller, but then invoke his constitutional right not to incriminate himself, his Fifth Amendment privilege.
It's entirely possible that, he could use his Fifth Amendment privilege, which would be, almost fatal for any other politician. But as this president says, he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and not suffer any negative political consequences. He uses Fifth Avenue. There's also the Fifth Amendment. And I don't know, I think that's at least a possibility.
From Fifth Avenue to the Fifth Amendment. Now, that's on the legal strategy. Holder also spoke about some broader criticisms of Trump's leadership. I have that for you later in the show, while another senior Obama administration colleague also speaking out about Trump's attacks on law enforcement.
This is the first president to make a full-throated, unvarnished attack on the entirety of the FBI, not going after J. Edgar Hoover, who was one person in the FBI and exonerated. This is to discredit the FBI and discredit his own Justice Department.
We have a lot in the top of the show, but we begin with our super panel, the Daily Beast's Betsy Woodruff, former federal prosecutor Karen Loeffler, who's worked with the FBI on hundreds of cases, and the Atlantic's Natasha Bertrand. Karen, I begin with you. When you hear your former colleague Eric Holder say Trump could take the Fifth, is that a good idea?
Well, really, it's it should be a political fiasco. But, I mean, as a citizen of the United States, he has the right to take the Fifth Amendment. But really, and of course it would be unprecedented, but to sit there and say, I will talk to you, but only under, I will either assert my Fifth Amendment or I want a grant of immunity, should be political suicide. But we've seen so many, amazing firsts that are sort of shocking. I'm really bound to say, who knows?
Well, and Karen, I always...
it shouldn't exist. But.
Right. Karen, I always respect your candor, and you're saying basically, wow, wow to this whole idea. I want to note that your legal receptivity to it, you point out that this is a legally possible thing to do, echoes what Eric Holder says, but you, Eric Holder, and Roger Stone are all overlapping tonight. I don't know how you feel about that. You don't have to state an opinion. I'll just state that Roger and Eric don't usually overlap. Here's what a longtime Trump advisor Roger Stone says. President could assert his Fifth Amendment privilege and tell Mueller to, quote, shove it, but adds, I recognize the political and legal danger of just stiffing the guy. I turn to you on the law, Karen. What is the legal danger in this context when you're a subject of a probe and you say, I can't speak based on the Fifth?
Well, I mean, certainly it's happened in many cases. You say, I can't speak based on the Fifth, and then the probe goes forward gathering all the other evidence, but you can't later go into court and say, you know, this is what I wanted to say and they didn't want to listen to me. So, I mean, in many cases, and especially when you're talking about targeting the President of the United States, you know, you want to give them an opportunity to answer the questions that they have, but the probe will continue, whether he says, you know, I'm willing to speak or not. But, you know, in some sense you lose the high ground of saying, well, I really wanted to tell them the truth, but they didn't want to hear from me.
Right. It kind of disavows the ability later. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just mean it's strategically doesn't come across very well.
Right.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. You're in Alaska, so we have the slight tape delay. Betsy Woodruff, your view on what we're hearing here, and I hate to go meta, but the meta of this, why is Eric Holder, why is Trump aide Roger Stone even talking about the Fifth?
It's interesting that we're hearing sort of this more aggressive and legally creative approach to how the president could respond to this situation with Mueller. I had a conversation just a little bit earlier today with a person who's quite familiar with the thinking on the president's legal team, and this person told me not to underestimate or not to understate the significant role that Jay Sekulow is playing in the negotiations between Trump's legal team and Mueller's. Now, in the past, there's kind of been this view that Sekulow, given that he's a First Amendment litigator who doesn't have any criminal law experience, maybe could have been sidelined in those conversations, but according to this person, that would be a very incorrect way of thinking about it. This person actually said that Sekulow is a force who can see around corners, and I think it's possible that when we look at some of these potentially hardball tactics that the president's team could be considering, that Sekulow could be contributing to that line of thinking, in large part because, look, he spent months this year going on Fox on a very regular basis, lambasting Mueller and his team, being a very aggressive voice. So I think if we see aggressive steps, it could be in part because of Jay.
If you're keeping score, and I don't blame you at home if you're not, because it's a lot, but Sekulow was, of course, the one who seized on some of the same alleged conflicts of interest at FBI to argue there should be a second special counsel. We've seen that argument gain more traction, at least among conservatives. Your view, Natasha?
And there'll be a 2-year budget deal, is then when the Senate turns to immigration, which technically is supposed to be tomorrow when they start debate, how does that play out? That is a very big question mark.
Okay, so that's what we watch for tomorrow on immigration. Stay with me, please. I also want to bring in some more breaking news that we're getting out of the White House. The senior aide to President Trump has resigned after 2 ex-wives went public with accusations of domestic abuse. I'm talking about Rob Porter. He is Trump's White House staff secretary. He denies these allegations. Let me be crystal clear on that, but he is stepping down anyway. Dan is with me, but I also want to bring in Jeff Zelenier, CNN senior White House correspondent. And Jeff, just starting here on this with you, again, you know, Rob Porter has said he's denied this entirely, but yet he's left the White House. Tell me more.
Indeed, Brooke, a fairly abrupt decision to announce his resignation. Now, just stepping back a bit, the White House staff secretary is a very important person in the West Wing, largely because they handle the information flow into and out of the Oval Office. So it gives them a lot of proximity to the president. So Rob Porter was a longtime Capitol Hill aide. He worked for Senator Orrin Hatch and others on Capitol Hill. And for the last year, he's been inside this administration. But he did announce that he was resigning today in the wake of that report of verbal and physical abuse of his 2 ex-wives. Now, this was first reported by the Daily Mail. This is something that has been percolating a bit. Only yesterday, several White House aides stood by him and said they were going to support him. And then today he resigns when some photographs were published also online of a black eye of one of his former wives. But here's his statement just a short time ago, Brooke. We did get this from Rob Porter. Let's take a look at the statement. He says this. He said, "These outrageous allegations are simply false. I took the photos given to the media nearly 15 years ago, and the reality behind them is nowhere close to what is being described." He goes on to say that I've been transparent and truthful about these vile claims, but I will not further engage publicly with a coordinated smear campaign. But, Brooke, it also gets a little bit more complicated because we are learning now that he also is having a personal relationship with Hope Hicks, the White House communications director, who of course is very close to the president. So that was one of the reasons he was viewed so highly inside the West Wing here. It was one of the reasons he was being protected. So certainly interesting. He announced he was resigning today. We're not certain the date of the resignation, but it'll be happening some point in the future.
Okay, and here's a quick follow, because I asked you last hour about,
Sure.
you know, listen, if you have this photographic evidence and this black eye, despite the fact that he's saying, I didn't, you know, obviously he would go through some sort of, you know, background check, and it's my understanding that one of the ex-wives brought this up with investigators as he was trying to get a job, right?
Indeed, Brooke, and that is something that we are still going to be learning more about. It is our understanding, our Jim Acosta and others are reporting that the FBI did learn through these interviews, you know, a routine interview to get a background check, a security clearance, that he did indeed have these allegations of abuse. Now, we do not believe there are ever criminal charges in this, but the FBI alerted the White House. We are learning about this. So it's one of the reasons he was never given a permanent security clearance. So that is one of the questions here the White House will have to answer, and so far they have not, about if they knew about this, why didn't they do something at that time? So this is something that is still developing here, but certainly these background checks by the FBI are very routine. Everyone is hired at the White House, and then they go through these background checks here for security clearances, and that apparently is when this was learned some point last year about these abuse allegations. Of course, it's all surfacing in the last couple days with the DailyMail.com report and some other reporting as well. And then he decided to resign rather abruptly, I would say, today, Brooke.
What are you thinking on this? I mean, the fact that he's saying he didn't do it, but he's leaving a pretty big job. Mm-hmm. How significant?
A very big job. Look, you know, we don't know. As Jeff was saying, it's too early to know the real deal and the details. I don't know if we'll ever know the real deal. I will say that in talking to people who have worked with Rob Porter in the White House and before that on the Hill, but particularly in the White House, they're pretty surprised by this. I mean, those who aren't privy to background checks, but just those who interacted with him as a colleague are pretty surprised. They call him extremely soft-spoken. Somebody said to me, the kind of guy that, you know, you say, what? Oh, wow. Because it's not kind of an in-your-face sort of personality. Having said that, you know, it just maybe a reminder that you don't always know people, but it is important to underscore, as you said, that he is denying these allegations. But I guess you can deny allegations and understand a political liability when you see one or when you are one.
Thank you.
Brooke, it's also,
go ahead, Jeff. Yeah,
it's also interesting to point out, as Dana was saying, we are getting some information as well that is showing that the White House is clearly trying to put the best possible spin or light on this. Senator Orrin Hatch, of course, the longest-serving Republican of Utah on Capitol Hill, the White House released a statement from him, a glowing statement about Rob Porter, also going after the media for reporting these allegations. It turns out that was entirely different than the statement Senator Hatch released himself out of his own office. Our MJ Lee was talking with Senator Hatch, and he said that his statement, he says this, he said, I'm heartbroken by today's allegations and every action I've had with the Rob. He's been courteous, professional, and respectful. I do not know the details of his personal life. Domestic violence in any form is abhorrent. I am praying for Rob and those involved. However, the White House released a statement from Senator Hatch in his name, and it says, it is incredibly discouraging to see such a vile attack on such a decent man. Shame on any publication that would print this, and shame on the politically motivated, morally bankrupt character assassins that would attempt to sully a good man's name. I know Rob, I've known him for years, and boy, it does sound Trumpian, and that was written from the White House. So did he say that, or it's the White House saying he said that? It was released, it was a printed statement released by the White House in the senator's name, and we are told that the senator, once his office learned more about this, they wanted to release their own. But again, Brooke, this shows, as I was saying earlier, the White House clearly trying to put a different light, a blame the media light on this. And again, we have to point out, one of the people at the center of this is the White House Communications Director, Hope Hicks, who's in charge of messaging. We are told by multiple people familiar with the situation that she is having a personal relationship with Rob Porter here. So that is one of the complicating dynamics in this, no question, but certainly Orrin Hatch wishing his former colleague well, but also stepping way back from what the White House was trying to say under his name. Brooke.
Jeff, thank you very much. Dana, thank you.
Thank you. Next,
marching orders. Secretary of Defense James Mattis weighing in on President Trump's request for a military parade. As more and more veterans are speaking out, saying no to any sort of parade. One Republican senator has actually called it cheesy. We'll discuss that. Also, she is Kim Jong-un's youngest sister, now being sent to lead the North Korea delegation at the Winter Olympics in South Korea. What we know about her background and the role that she has in her family. Keep in mind, this is happening as the vice president announces added pressure on North Korea ahead of the Olympics. Stay with me. We're back. You're watching CNN. I'm Brooke Baldwin. President Trump has given the marching orders. Now the defense chief says the Pentagon is preparing options for a possible military parade on down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. Perhaps could happen this coming Veterans Day. The president was reportedly inspired by France's Bastille Day parade, which he attended with French President Macron last year.
It was one of the greatest parades I've ever seen. It was 2 hours on the button, and it was military might. To a large extent, because of what I witnessed, we may do something like that on July 4th in Washington, down Pennsylvania. I don't know. We're going to have to try and top it.
Before we talk about the feasibility and political implications of this parade, I want to take you back to the end of the Gulf War. This is what was being broadcast right here on CNN the last time the U.S. held a military parade in 1991.
This is CNN.
The parade featured military equipment. The Patriot missile got the loudest applause. You'll remember during the war, it got the name Scud Buster.
This parade meant we're finally home, this is finally over, and the American people appreciated what we did.
Today, to me, meant that going through Operation Desert Storm and Desert Shield was worth it. And it made me realize just how much, the people back here, were standing up for us and appreciated what we were doing.
It's good to see the country showing their support. I think it's, it's good to see my daughter,
There was controversy over having a victory parade, from anti-war activists to Arab representatives who said there should be no celebration over the deaths of more than 100,000 Iraqis. Some even called this parade a campaign rally for George Bush.
Let's have a conversation. Christine Quinn is with me. She is the former Speaker for New York City Council. And Steve Lonigan is a former Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate, and he served as a former New Jersey national director for Ted Cruz's campaign. Great to have both of you on.
Thank you.
I want to start on the parade, and we had talked to two veterans last hour, and I was asking you in commercial, you said both of your fathers served in the military. Chris, just starting with you, do you think it is a great idea, honor our military, have a parade, or too much of a Trump show?
Well, I'll quote my father, Larry Quinn, 91, World War II veteran, the Navy. He thinks it's ridiculous, a waste of money. Obviously, he believes, and I believe with him, that there's victories to celebrate. They should be celebrated, and Veterans Day should be a sacrosanct day. But the president clearly called for this parade because he had fun in France, because he liked watching all of the big guns and troops parade in front of him. This really smacks of the president liking the way the North Korean leader dictates a little too much. This seems about Donald Trump and making sure everyone knows he has the biggest button, and not about veteran sacrifices.
What do you think, Steve?
Well, I think coming out of New York City, which gives America the biggest military parade every single year, called Fleet Week, where we parade our United States Navy up the Hudson River, and thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of people from around the world come and enjoy seeing that. There's no reason we can't honor our military in Washington, D.C. as well. We might as well show off what a great job the president is doing of rebuilding the American military after 8 years of Barack Obama, of sequestration, of demoralization of our military strength. It's on the mend. It's getting stronger every day. The world knows it. Why not show off? Why not show off to our military how proud we are of that?
But I think Steve just told the truth of what this parade is about, showcasing what Republicans believe is Donald Trump's successes. That's very different than Fleet Week, which is a long-standing tradition to give our men and women of the Navy and the Marines a break and a celebration.
A long-standing parade, Christine. A long-standing parade.
It's actually more of a gathering than a parade, Fleet Week, but long-standing, yes. as opposed to this, and that's about the men and women. As you said, Steve, the parade the president is proposing would be about saluting the president's so-called good work. Political, serving and supporting military.
It's
Very
saluting the greatness of our military, have sacrificed so much in this long-standing effort in the Middle East, losing men and women every single year. I mean, enough is enough. Let's tell the world we have the most powerful military on the planet Earth, and they should stand down from coming after us.
I don't think people shouldn't need a parade that salutes the president, as you said, the president's so-called success, as I added so-called, to know that America is the greatest might morally and militarily in the world. We're losing that posture and that position, and people seeing us that way because of the president's behavior.
Our military is getting stronger every day. We're rebuilding our military forces. ISIS is disintegrating because of this military. Their morale is being reboosted after being demoralized under Barack Obama and his sequestration efforts. And it's about time we showed the world what we're made of.
Okay, let me jump in. Hang on.
The world doesn't know. You think the world knows.
Let me jump in. We heard from, let's listen to the Secretary of Defense, who jumped into the White House press briefing and offered this when asked about it.
As far as the parade goes, again, the president's respect, his fondness for the military, I think, is reflected in him asking for these options. We've been putting together some options. We'll send them up to the White House for decision.
Had a general on last hour who pointed out more of the SecDef's sort of reticence. He didn't go on and on, which he thought spoke volumes. He was of your camp, saying, listen, if our military is a bunch of badasses, pardon, we don't need to show the world, we just know we are. That said, also, let me add one more piece of sound. This is a Republican Senator, Lindsey Graham. He weighed in as well.
I'm not looking for a Soviet-style hardware display. That's not who we are. It's kind of cheesy and I think shows weakness, quite frankly. But have a parade where you can display our finest and we can all say thank you and honor them would be fine. I'd like to see kids marching. I'd like to honor military families.
Okay, I just wanted to get those voices in the conversation as well. Let's move on to our former Vice President, Joe Biden, who was here at CNN last night. He was on with Chris Cuomo and offered this when it comes to the president.
I just marvel at some of the things he says and does. Like, what, 2 days ago, anybody didn't stand up and clap for him was un-American and then maybe even treasonous?
They say it was tongue-in-cheek. Democrats can't take a joke.
Well, let me tell you, he's a joke.
Steve, that's been the headline coming from our former vice president. Calling the president a joke.
Coming from a guy who plagiarized an entire speech from the British Labour Secretary, Neil Cadet, that people seem to forget. You got to question who the joke is. I think Biden is irrelevant. Nobody cares what he has to say. And the president, again, is presiding over the greatest economy we've seen in decades, the rebuilding of our American military, great economic growth, great stock market growth, despite little recent corrections, and a future economy that's going to be second to none over the last 30 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously, bringing up the speech from the Labor Secretary is really having to reach back in history to criticize Joe Biden.
You learn from
history,
though.
I think you do,
Yep.
But Joe Biden has moved on and served this country well, and I think if you look at recent polling on the former vice president, it shows that many, many Americans care what he has to say and what he thinks. But let's stop for a second. Mm-hmm. There's all of this upsetness that Joe Biden has said this about the president. Let's remember all of the horrible things that Donald Trump said and did regarding President Obama's citizenship. He, in essence, called him an illegitimate American citizen, constantly, disrespectfully, and demeaningly demanding his birth certificate, leading the so-called birthers movement. You want to talk about somebody being disrespectful to the President of the United States and to the office of the presidency? It is our present President, Donald Trump, not Joe Biden, a man who's dedicated his life to service to this country.
Well,
his family has sacrificed in the light of that.
I hope Joe Biden runs for president so Donald Trump can beat him and send him into retirement once and for all.
Well, if that's the pair, I don't think that will be the outcome.
No.
Steve and Chris, we'll leave it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate both of you. Coming up next, Kim Jong-un's sister becomes the first member of the North Korean dynasty to ever cross the border into South Korea. What is behind her history-making trip to the Olympics, and what with 30-year-old Kim Jo-young. It will be the first time any member of the Kim dynasty has actually set foot on South Korean soil. So let's talk it over with Gordon Chang. He's the author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. And I'm just so entirely fascinated about this and have a gazillion questions for you. First and foremost, what do we even know about the sister?
Well, we know that she's probably the youngest of Kim Jong-il's children, but we don't even really know that because we don't even know the number.
Of siblings, we don't even know.
We don't know. But the one thing that most Korea watchers think is that she is the most capable of Kim Jong-il's children, and which means that she would be the absolute ruler of North Korea right now if she weren't a woman, because it's a very male-dominated society, and so therefore that puts her out of the running. But because it puts her out of the running, it also means she's not competition for her brother, Kim Jong-un, who actually is in charge, and that means she's become extremely influential. Even, for instance, the number 2 in the regime, Cho Rong-hae, he's not that important because Kim Jong-un just tells him what to do. He doesn't do that to his sister. He actually listens to his sister.
So with the sister, as we said, the first time someone of the family has set foot on South Korean soil, are they worried about her interfacing with South Koreans? Would there be any danger? Would they want to keep her, I don't know, in a private home instead of staying in some big hotel?
Yeah, I think both the South Koreans and the North Koreans think the same way. They want to control all interactions that she has. You know, she could be talking to people like Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, but this is going to be under some very, very defined circumstances. And they certainly don't want her talking to ordinary South Koreans or to people who just go to the Olympics. So this will be one of the most closely choreographed items at the Olympics.
It's possible. I was asking you in commercial break, you know, we know that Vice President Pence, right, will be over there, and for the opening ceremony, you could have, you know, we don't know the seating chart, but you could have this sister and the U.S. Vice President sitting certainly under the same roof.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is important because Mike Pence, the Vice President, said, look, we're not ruling out discussions with North Korea while he's at the Olympics. Now, he's not trying to set them up. But, you know, Moon Jae-in, who does want to see a dialogue between North Korea and the U.S., could very well try to arrange something, you know, make it look accidental. You know, these are all sorts of possibilities that can occur. You know, this is South Korea, after all. Anything can happen, especially at a very volatile time like this. And if Pence does meet Kim Jong-un, Yo-jong, it is going to be one of the biggest stories on the Korean Peninsula this year.
And just when I was in South Korea a couple months ago, I was so fascinated at the notion of South Koreans, the actual even Korean language. Someone explained it to me. If she started talking to someone in South Korea, it's almost like someone like us talking to someone from the 1950s. We speak the same language, but there's a barrier.
Oh, it's even more different than that, because what's happened is you have two Koreas. Of course, they sit side by side, but they've had very different developments since 1948. And so the dialects are different. You know, the word usage is different. There's sort of very difficult communication problems. And we're seeing this right now with the women's ice hockey team, which is fielded by both North Korea and South Korea. It's a joint team. First time the Koreas have fielded a joint team. Well, they're having problems talking to each other. So this is going to be, this is one of the most fascinating things. Yeah, they're all Koreans, but they're two very different societies.
So noteworthy. Gordon Chang, thank you so much. We're going to watch this Olympics very closely. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
We're going to get you back now to our breaking news out of the White House. A senior aide to President Trump up and resigning after 2 ex-wives have gone public with accusations of domestic. More breaking news out of the White House now on this senior aide to President Trump who's just resigned. Rob Porter is his name, Trump's White House staff secretary. He's been accused of domestic abuse by 2 of his ex-wives. He has vehemently denied these allegations, but is choosing to step down nevertheless. White House reporter Caitlin Collins is up with me now, and so you have new details, Caitlin, about when the White House learned of these ex-wife allegations.
Well, that's right, Brooke. These allegations have only come out in the media in the last 24 to 48 hours or so. But I am told by someone inside the White House that staffers inside and officials were generally aware of these allegations, the nature of these allegations made against Rob Porter for months now, but they did not know, quote, all the gory details, this person tells me, that have surfaced in these recent media reports. Now, that would be of interest to people in the White House, of course, because not only the nature of these allegations, but also in regards to Porter's security clearance, because in his role as staff secretary. It's certainly not a role that is well known to most people outside of the White House and this complex, but that was a role that required Porter to be in touch with a lot of the documents that coming in and out of the Oval Office, not only the executive orders, but once John Kelly became the chief of staff, Porter's role really grew larger and began to encompass more things, not only briefing clips and whatnot that were brought to the president, but someone with a security clearance that would have to deal with the nature of those things, the security of those things here, Brooke. But right now we're told that staffers inside the White House were generally aware about these allegations that had been made against Porter.
All right. Caitlin, thank you. Again, he's denying it, but he's resigning. More news in the Russia investigation. The top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee saying that they may have to enforce subpoenas to be able to talk to former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski and the White House former chief strategist Steve Bannon. We'll explain what happens next. The top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee says it is time to subpoena former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski and to enforce the subpoena of the former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon. I'm talking about Congressman Adam Schiff. He wants to compel both of these men to testify in this House intel investigation into Russian election meddling. Lewandowski reportedly informing Schiff that he will not voluntarily return to appear before his committee. So let's talk it all over with CNN legal analyst Paige Pate. He's also a criminal defense and constitutional attorney. Paige Pate, nice to see you.
Good to see you, Brooke.
So just your reaction to Bannon trying to save what he has to say from Mueller, and Schiff basically saying, you know, not so fast. What happens if Bannon and Lewandowski resist?
Well, it's a great question because we're now seeing the congressional investigations play out in many ways the way we've seen some of the special counsel's investigation play out, because subpoenas will now be served and presumably enforced on these witnesses if they do not come to terms and voluntarily appear in front of these committees and produce whatever documents are being requested. Now, once the subpoena is served, the lawyers for Bannon, they can file an objection to that, and it would eventually go to court for a resolution as to whether or not they actually have to appear and provide whatever documents are being requested.
Okay. That's those two guys. Let's talk about the president, because the latest, sort of strand on the story of will he, won't he talk to, Bob Mueller or Mueller's team, the special counsel, when they ask. They haven't yet. His lawyers are trying to avoid that potentially. But to me, what's being overlooked here is the rationale to why Trump wants to talk to him. From our reporting page, it's because the president thinks he is a master at these sorts of things because of his experience with lawsuits and the fact that he has been in so many depositions.
Brooke, I have represented many people, high-level executives, political figures, never the president, but many people who were targets of a criminal investigation or a subject of a criminal investigation, and they think if they just had the chance, they could go in there and explain it all to the investigators. They could talk themselves out of being charged. That makes absolutely no sense, especially in a case like this. This is not the beginning of the investigation, where the special counsel's office is simply trying to gather facts. They already have a lot of facts. The purpose for interviewing the president is to confront him with those facts. The missing link here in an obstruction investigation is the intent of the president. And the only way the special counsel's office really gets to that intent is to interview the president. So there's absolutely no legal reason for doing it. Any lawyer worth his salt or her salt would never let the president go into an interview like that.
So you talked about all your different kinds of clients who thought that they could go in and talk themselves out of it. And in this case, we're talking about the president. And what do you think it is? Is it hubris?
I think it is, absolutely, because what are you going to do? Convince the special counsel's office that they're wrong about whatever conclusions they've made? We don't know what conclusions they've made, but they have absolutely reviewed a lot of evidence. They know things that the president presumably does not know about what other witnesses like Michael Flynn may have said during his cooperation with the special counsel. So you don't go into an interview and think you can have a man-to-man showdown when you don't know what the other side has. There's just a no-win scenario here for the president by going into a meeting like that.
Okay. Let me play one piece of sound. This is from Congressman Trey Gowdy. He is blaming the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, for what he sees as Bob Mueller's overreach.
I have fear that jurisdiction may wander a bit. I think it already has. It's already wandered a little bit, But I would not blame Bob Mueller. I would blame whoever drafted the jurisdiction in the charter that empowered him. And if you look at it, it says matters that may arise from the investigation. What in the heck does that mean? I mean, is that a bank robbery in Topeka, Kansas?
And that language came from Rod Rosenstein?
Yes, ma'am.
So what's the root of the message there, Paige? Is that just, again, another example of trying to get out ahead and weaken the Mueller investigation?
I think so, Brooke, because now if there's an obstruction charge or a money laundering charge or something that arises out of the investigation but is not directly related to the Russia part of the investigation, then you may have Trump and some of his supporters in the White House and in Congress saying, wait a minute, this was something the special counsel was not even supposed to look at, and because his direction was so poorly drafted and vague, he was able to, as Representative Gowdy said, wander into these areas. But, Brooke, that's necessary for an investigation like this. We don't know what evidence the special counsel is going to uncover during the investigation until the investigation is over. So you have to give the special counsel some leeway to pursue those leads. And there's always a check. Always a check by Deputy Attorney General who can say, no, don't go there.
Paige Pate, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brooke.
Coming up next, a sex scandal that has now turned into an ethics investigation. Have you heard about this Nashville mayor story? She's accused